Ohio, 2018. Barbara Reil had a system for waiting rooms. She always brought a book. She had brought a book that Tuesday, a paperback thriller she'd been carrying in her purse for 3 weeks without opening. But when she sat down in the plastic chair nearest the window, she picked up the magazine instead. No particular reason. She just did. The magazine was the kind that exists in waiting rooms and nowhere else. Glossy, corporate, slightly out of date. A feature on European business innovation. She wasn't reading it, really. She was turning pages the way you do when you're somewhere you don't want to be, when your mouth is already numb from the anesthetic and you're just trying to get through the next 20 minutes. She turned to page 47. Later, she would have difficulty explaining what happened next. Not because she didn't remember. She remembered everything, with a clarity that would stay with her for years. But because the experience didn't fit neatly into language, it wasn't recognition exactly. It was something that happened below recognition, in the body rather than the mind. Her hands stopped. Her eyes stopped. And then, a half second later, her brain caught up and told her what she was looking at. A conference room in Lisbon. 12 men in suits around a white table laughing at something out of frame. Ordinary corporate photography, the kind nobody looks at twice. She looked at it for a long time. The jaw was the same, the left shoulder sitting fractionally higher than the right. She had spent 17 years sleeping next to that asymmetry, 17 years watching it move through rooms. The scar above the eyebrow was small and pale and curved exactly the way she remembered, from a Saturday afternoon in 2007 when he came down wrong off a ladder, and she pressed a dish towel to his face, and he said it was nothing. It was fine. Stop fussing. She hadn't been fussing. She'd been scared. The man in the photograph had a full beard and wireframe glasses she had never seen before. He had lost what looked like 30 pounds. His name tag read, Daniel Hartwell, Senior Trade Consultant, Geneva. Barbara sat in that plastic chair and didn't move for a long time. The television in the corner was showing a morning talk show. Someone called her name from the front desk and she didn't hear it. She took out her phone and photographed page 47. Then she went in for her cleaning, sat through it without speaking, drove home and wrote an email to a detective in Lisbon, whose address she had found in 40 minutes of searching. She almost didn't send it. She sat with her hand over the trackpad for a moment, aware of how it would sound, aware of what it would mean if she was wrong, aware, and this was the thing that almost stopped her, of what it would mean if she was right. She sent it. His name had been Marcus Reil, and he had been dead since September 4th, 2008. By August 2007, the total shortfall of the company is $2.3 million. The positions have collapsed. The recovery is not coming. His brokerage firm has announced a compliance audit scheduled for November 14th. The fraud was documented, referred to federal prosecutors. The clients, teachers, nurses, a retired electrician from Parma, a woman who had saved for 30 years toward something she called her cushion, were partially compensated through the firm's insurance carrier. The rest was written off. The Coast Guard found his kayak 9 miles off Lake Erie on a Thursday morning. Paddle still across the hull. No body, no note, no signs of struggle. Water temperature the night before had been 58 degrees. At 58 degrees, a person in the water without a dry suit has perhaps 90 minutes before their muscles stop cooperating. The medical examiner noted this in his report. The insurance investigator noted it too. The case was reviewed, processed, and closed. Accidental drowning, a tragedy. These things happened on the lake. The case against Marcus Reil closed. The file went into storage. 11 years passed. His wife collected $400,000 in life insurance. What actually happened on September 4th, 2008, took investigators 3 months to reconstruct, and even then some of it remained inference. He does not go home that night. He sits at his desk until 11 p.m. He requests several client files from the archive. He reviews each one. He logs out for the last time at 11:43 p.m. and takes the stairs. 3 weeks later, he calls in sick. He misses a Monday, a Tuesday. On Wednesday, his wife reports him missing. Marcus had been planning since 2005. Not the fraud that had started earlier in 2003 almost casually, a few redirected percentages that he told himself were temporary. No, what he had been planning since 2005 was the exit. He understood, with the precision of someone who had spent 16 years inside financial systems, exactly how a missing person investigation worked. He understood what triggered a fraud investigation and what delayed one. He understood the difference between a case pursued against a living defendant and a case closed against a dead man's estate. He had read the relevant federal statutes. He had thought about it the way other people think about retirement, carefully, over time, with attention to the specifics. The Canadian identity had taken 18 months to build. The birth certificate belonged to a child named Daniel Hartwell, who had lived for 3 weeks in 1971 before dying of pneumonia in a hospital in Sudbury, Ontario. Marcus found the record through a genealogy database. The rest followed the record. A social insurance number applied for by mail, a driver's license, eventually a passport. All of it done slowly, from inside his existing life, with no single step large enough to attract attention. The $340,000 he carried out of the country had been accumulated the same way, quietly, over time, in 3 currencies, across 3 accounts. He left the kayak where it would be found. He had thought about the paddle, whether it was more plausible resting across the hull or floating separately, and decided on across the hull. He drove to a bus station in Erie, Pennsylvania, and bought a ticket with cash. 14 hours later, he was in Toronto. 3 days after that, he was in Bangkok. He stayed in Bangkok for 14 months. He rented a room in the Siloam district and paid 6 months in advance and gave no name. He ate at the same 3 restaurants on rotation. He studied Spanish for 3 hours every morning, using textbooks he bought from a second-hand shop near the river. He worked 2 mornings a week at a shipping logistics company for no pay, telling them he was a Canadian businessman interested in the industry, which was partially true. He lost weight deliberately, tracking his caloric intake in a notebook. He grew the beard. He bought the glasses. He did not contact anyone from his previous life. Not once. His neighbors, interviewed years later by Interpol investigators, described him as quiet and polite. One woman who ran a food stall near his building said he always ordered the same thing and always said thank you in Thai. She said she had assumed he was a teacher. She said she had liked him. This came up repeatedly, in Bangkok, in Buenos Aires, in Geneva. People liked him. His colleagues at the import-export firm in Palermo, where he worked for 3 years as Daniel Hartwell, described someone meticulous and warm in roughly equal measure. He worked late. He remembered things. Birthdays, the names of people's children, the outcome of conversations from months earlier. He deflected questions about his past with a practiced lightness that read as modesty rather than evasion. A Canadian upbringing, a decade in international finance, some time traveling. He said it without discomfort, and because he said it without discomfort, nobody pressed. By 2013, he had been dead for 5 years and had built, from nothing, a professional reputation solid enough to attract the attention of a Geneva-based consultancy called Meridian Trade Partners. He joined them in January 2014 as a senior consultant. His salary was 180,000 Swiss francs. He signed a 5-year lease on an apartment in the Eau Vive district. He applied for Swiss permanent residency in 2017 and paid the legal fees without hesitation. This is the part of the story that investigators found genuinely difficult to categorize. A man who had engineered his own disappearance with the precision of a long-term fraud, someone who had thought about exit routes before most people had thought about dinner, had arrived in Geneva and apparently stopped planning. There were no liquid reserves being accumulated for another move, no third identity under construction. His financial behavior was the behavior of someone who intended to stay. His colleagues at Meridian later described someone who had arrived already settled inside himself. He stayed late on Fridays to help junior staff with presentations. He brought pastries to the office on his birthday rather than waiting for someone to bring them to him. He had a regular table at a cafe 2 blocks away. Thursday mornings, same newspaper, same order. Whether this was the conclusion of something or a continuation of it, whether Daniel Hartwell was a long-term strategy, Or an identity that had simply taken hold? Is a question nobody has answered satisfactorily. Not the prosecutors, not the psychologists who later evaluated him, not Marcus himself, who gave answers that were cooperative and precise and somehow never quite responsive to what was actually being asked. In November 2018, Daniel Hartwell attended a trade innovation conference in Lisbon. He had been careful about photography for 11 years. He avoided group images when possible. He scheduled meetings in interior rooms. He was never the subject of a press mention. At a working lunch on the second day, a photographer moved through the conference room with a wide-angle lens. Marcus was seated toward the back of the table, not in the focal point of the frame. He was mid-laugh at something a colleague had said. He was wrong about the focal point by 4 feet. The photograph ran 4 months later in a business travel magazine with 340,000 print subscribers, distributed to corporate waiting rooms and airport lounges across the United States. One copy went to a dental office in Westlake, Ohio, 3 miles from the house where Barbara Reil had pressed a dish towel to her husband's face on a Saturday afternoon in 2007. Carla Souza forwarded the email to Interpol's Financial Crimes Unit within 48 hours. The 2008 brokerage case was technically still open. The statute of limitations had been suspended, pending biological confirmation of death that had never come. Within 6 days, Canadian authorities confirmed that the Hartwell passport had been built on the Sudbury birth record. Swiss federal authorities were notified. Meridian Trade Partners received a preservation order. Interpol issued a red notice. Marcus went to work on a Monday morning in April and didn't know any of it. He stopped at the cafe. Same table. He read his emails and marked 3 items for follow-up. He finished the coffee and walked to the office and sat at his desk and opened a proposal for a ceramics manufacturer in Lyon. It was a good proposal. He had spent part of the previous weekend refining the market entry section. At 11:43 a.m., 2 officers from the Swiss Federal Police came out of the elevator and spoke with the managing director for 8 minutes. Then they took the elevator to the 4th floor. He looked up when the door opened. He didn't move. He didn't argue. He sat very still and then said one word. How? Not a question exactly. More like something escaping. One of the officers held up a printed copy of the photograph, page 47, the conference room, the 12 men laughing at something out of frame. Marcus looked at it for a long time. Then quietly, with what the officers would later describe in their reports as composure, I thought I was standing far enough back. He had been 11 years and 4 months outside his own life. He had rebuilt himself twice, crossed 4 borders on legitimate documents, learned a language, constructed a professional record that withstood normal scrutiny, made real friends, attended their family dinners, applied for residency in a country with strong due process protections. He had never contacted anyone from his previous life. Not once. He had been meticulous about cameras for over a decade. He stood in the wrong place at a conference he had every professional reason to attend. Extradition took 9 months. He didn't contest it. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud, identity fraud, and willful misrepresentation of death to obstruct a financial investigation. The sentencing judge described the case as among the most methodically executed frauds she had seen in 22 years on the bench. She sentenced him to 14 years. Of the 2, $3 million taken from 38 clients in 2007, $870,000 was recovered from a Geneva investment account held under a third alias discovered during the seizure of his personal files. The remaining $1.43 million has not been found. Prosecutors believe it exists somewhere. They have not said where they think that is. Barbara Reil attended every session of the trial. She sat in the 2nd row. She had collected the life insurance after his disappearance, raised their 2 children alone, worked 2 jobs through the years when the insurance money ran out. She had believed, for 11 years, that her husband had drowned in a lake. She had grieved him. She had moved through the specific, exhausting work of rebuilding a life after loss. And then she had sat in that dental waiting room and turned to page 47, and everything she had rebuilt had been built on something that wasn't true. At sentencing, the judge asked if she wanted to address the court. She stood up. She looked across the room at Marcus for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't know which man I'm looking at." He didn't answer, but he held her gaze, and the people in that courtroom who had read the file, who understood what he had done and how long he had done it, and with what precision, noticed that. What that meant, nobody said. Some things the record doesn't resolve. What Marcus Reil built across 11 years was not simply a crime. It was a sustained argument, made daily in every small decision, that identity is a structure rather than a fixed thing, that the self can be taken apart and reassembled somewhere else with different materials, and that no institution has the architecture to catch it if the work is careful enough. He was almost right. For 11 years and 4 months, he was completely right. The thing that ended it was not a flaw in the plan. It was not carelessness or greed or the human impulse to surface. It was a photographer's angle at a conference he had every professional reason to attend, a magazine's print run, a waiting room, a woman who knew the way his left shoulder sat. You can engineer a new name, a new country, a new career, and a new face. You cannot engineer a world where no one who knew the old one ever happens to be looking. The architecture holds until something outside the architecture moves, and something always does. If you want to see what happens when someone builds in the other direction, not disappearing into anonymity, but manufacturing a false identity so publicly visible that the institution itself becomes the disguise, watch our next video on the woman who convinced an entire government he was someone else, and used their own trust in him to stay untouchable for 9 years.